Fitting wheel spacers to my XKR actually wasn't something which I originally planned to do, but when I was still in the honeymoon phase after buying the car initially, Maverick, who many of you will know as the Discord runner for this channel, he suggested picking up some. And I looked at the car and I thought, you know what, that's not a bad call, because to me, my eye isn't drawn to that kind of thing initially, but when you actually do look at how kind of lost in the arches the wheels look on the XKR as standard, it kind of does make sense to space them out a little bit, or at least it could. Now, we're going to cover a couple of questions which you will doubtless have, not necessarily just as an XKR owner, but you could take many of these things in general as just my advice, my perspective, as a mechanic myself, but also as a consumer using a product. Now, first of all, how much should you pay? You can pay a lot or you can pay a little. Generally speaking, I would recommend actually going for a more established brand and a more, not necessarily realistic price, but like a price that has some weight to it. So for instance, like H&R Springs does a set that you can do, I believe, for the XKR as well. They're an established brand. You can easily pay up to like 200 quid for a set. You can pay as little as like 30 or 40 if you get cheap ones. So of course it goes without saying, don't go cheap when it's something as important as spacers are, considering that they're in direct interaction with the road wheels. Now, some people also have safety concerns, given that you are slipping this, in my case, forged aluminium sleeve over the 5 existing hub bolts of the Jaguar, which then has 5 bolts of its own, which attach to the wheel. So you're adding in an extra 4 components, which are of course increasing the stresses on the car because the track itself is wider than stock. So is this kind of thing even safe to do? Does it make the car look stupid? Some people hate the look of like that extreme cambered stance, so is it going to do that to the car? Well, as you'll see in this video, it certainly doesn't make it look cambered. Personally, I like that look on certain vehicles, but if you don't need to worry because it doesn't do that at all. In terms of stresses, for those who don't know, all components on every production vehicle are actually designed to go far beyond what they actually are required to do on a daily basis, in, for instance, stress testing. So, no, as long as the components themselves, again, in the case of these being forged aluminium ones, as long as they are up to scratch, then yes, they are safe to put on. Now, where I would begin to have concerns is if you go extreme. If you put like a 12-inch spacer on either side of the car and have like a ridiculous hot rod looking stance, well then that might be where you need to strengthen up some other components as well. But in the case of mine, I actually fitted 20mm spacers on the front and 15 on the back, which sounds like it might be a little bit odd. But the reason for that is the rear ones fill out the arches a little bit more to begin with anyway, and also because the rear tyres themselves are already wider, you don't need to counteract that as much. Now in the case of mine, 15mm on the back is perfect. As you'll see from the video, in my opinion, any wider and it would begin to become intrusive. It would exit the arch, and that's not what I wanted. The front ones, I think I could have actually probably gone a little bit wider, because they don't quite fill the arches as much as the back, but of course you also have to bear in mind that the front wheels have to do more than the rear wheels. The rear wheels are always facing forwards, at least if you're driving properly, whereas the front ones have to turn, and you do have to factor that in so that you don't end up rubbing the arches with the tyres. It's not exactly ideal. So in the case of mine, 20s on the front, 15s on the back, so if you want this exact appearance, that's the size you need to go for. Now, in terms of pricing, I'm not going to advertise the brand that these are because, quite frankly, I contacted them about partnering for this video and they declined to even answer. So if they can't be bothered to answer, then I can't be bothered to do free advertising for them. Needless to say, there are plenty of brands you can go for, including really well-established ones like H&R, and many owners have gone for ones like that. I would not recommend going cheap. If they're cheap, it's for a reason, and when it comes to, for instance, something interacting with the road wheels, it's better to go safe than sorry. Now, in terms of the dynamics of the car, does it change the handling? Does it change the stability? Can you actually feel a difference? Well, this one's interesting to me because it's hard to tell sometimes, especially without an objective test like a lap time, if it's just psychosomatic. Because to me, it actually kind of does feel a little bit more stable through corners. I wouldn't necessarily say the handling is better, but the car does feel a little bit more planted. Again though, it's hard to tell if that's just me thinking that or noticing the car's stability more than I was before, but it does, seem to make sense at least that it wouldn't make it worse, that's for sure. Having a wider track is what a race car has, and that's one of the reasons why. It does give you more stability, less body roll. And of course, doing something like this doesn't affect your suspension quality, it doesn't affect ride height, so it's not really like you're sacrificing anything to have it. These ones that I paid for were about £130 for the set, so they certainly weren't cheap ones. As I said, they are forged aluminium. I'm really happy with the way they look, and I've probably included an image here in the video which is actually from a company that I didn't use, but it's a perfect image to show the difference. On the left you can see the stock rear wheel arch, and on the right you can see it after the space has been fitted. And even though I'm not familiar with exactly the size spacer which they used, you can definitely see a difference. And most people fit spacers to, of course, increase the width of the car in terms of its appearance. My favourite thing about it, as you can see from this image, is actually not so much the width, it's that it makes the tyres themselves look beefier, because you can see more of them. They're not lost in the shadows of the wheel arch. At the same time, though, the tyres and the wheels on the case of mine, with the dimensions that I went for, are no wider than the bodywork of the car. So in terms of curbing the wheels, scraping, vehicles, scraping things in general when taking corners or going through tight spaces, the risk is no higher than the stock car, because the body itself is still the parameter of the car, the wing mirrors still stick out further anyway, so you're not actually making the car any trickier to drive. Across the board, I think it's a pretty nice little upgrade to do. It's not too expensive, you can pretty much do it to any car, and it does have some real-world benefits. So overall, that's it for my experience with fitting spacers. There's not really much else, if anything, I want to do to my Jag now. There's some smaller details here and there which I probably won't bother, to be honest. But that's it overall for this installment. Of course, check out my other vids regarding the Jag if you want to see, for instance, fitting the better exhaust, the pros and cons of owning one, or even putting my Jag up against others to see which one is the better choice, 4.2 litre versus 5 litre, all that kind of stuff. But if you're new to the channel and want to see more content like this, of course subscribe down below, and until next time I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.